Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I read The Reluctant Fundamentalists by Mohsin Hamid, published in 2007. The film adaptation was released in 2012, and I will do a brief review of that as well towards the end. So this book is about Changez and how he details his relationship with America to an unnamed American. However, underneath of that facade, this is really about how 9/11 changed the trajectory of Changez's life and led him to his current position. And honestly, we really don't know what his current position is, so it's kind of left up to the reader to decipher. So a little background information. Mohsin Hamid debuted as an author with Moth Smoke in 2000. Some of his other works include How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia in 2013 and Exit West in 2017. Fun fact, he actually studied under the Toni Morrison at Princeton, so automatically I'm a fan. And much like our main character, he has experience with elite Ivy League level education in the United States, being a foreigner and coming from a different country, but also working for a firm much like the occupation of Changez in the US. Now, fair warning, as even though we just crossed the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks against the US, this is still an event which conjures up a lot of emotions for people. So if you're one of those people, feel free to skip this review. Although I do think that the book is very informative and it is worth a read. But if you can't bear it, then by all means, no hard feelings. But for those that aren't aware, the 9/11 terrorist attacks resulted in a heightened sense of Islamophobia in the US specifically. And it really led to enraged war moves against the Taliban and any country associated with the Taliban. So this put a lot of Muslim Americans in a very precarious position, and that's precisely what this book is really about at the heart. Now, for those watching on YouTube, you can see that the crescent moon star, which represents Islam, is taking the place of the C in the word reluctant. So that is just, a callback to the nation in which Changez came from, but, also the country and all that. Now, this book is basically a very long monologue. It's Changez telling us a story, which when we have a story within a story, that is called a frame story. So there are two plot lines for the reader to focus on. And although there's really only one other person that he's speaking to, which is the unnamed American, in my review, I'm calling him the guest, he's really speaking to the audience as well. And when he switches from plot point to plot point, meaning when he switches from talking about his past to referencing something in the present, it is abrupt. But because he is clearly using, transition words, you're able to follow that, okay, we're in the present right now. We're not talking about what happened when he was in the US. And you can tell clearly that there's two different timelines going on because his life in the US has to be in the past because in the present they are in Lahore, Pakistan. The tone of Changez throughout the book is purposely over friendly. You can tell from the first page that he is, I guess you could say, overcompensating for the guest and his uneasiness. So he's really trying to make sure that the guest feels comfortable. The motive behind that is debatable, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later. But you're supposed to understand that there is an exaggerated sense of friendliness. And last thing, when we're talking about the writing of this book, there are a couple of parallels that are important to the character arcs of the people that we are introduced to. So the first is identity. So Changez narrates his life as a foreigner within the American workforce and how that challenged who he is as a person. And adding into that, the 9/11 terrorist attacks, how that really changed how he viewed the world and how people reacted to him. But also, what is the identity of the guest? It's never really explicitly stated, who this person is and what they're here for. So underneath all of that, we're still trying to figure that out. But you can tell that from the story that Changez is narrating to the point in the present where we are now, there is a clear changing of his identity, or how maybe a rediscovering of sorts, and how he presents himself to the world. So that is essentially his character arc. The second parallel I have is with the love and relationships. And this is between Erica, who is someone that Changez fell in love with in the US, and her old boyfriend. So their relationship kind of foreshadowed the relationship between Changez and Erica. So really what we have here is lovers that are mentally trapped in a relationship with someone who is not in their life anymore. And it just adds a little sprinkle of anguish into an already very tense and strained situation. But it's like the same thing happening over and over again, unfortunately. Now, I have very brief talking points on the characters, because besides talking about, Changez and his struggle with being a foreigner during the 9/11 time, and the guest who we really don't know, there's not much to pull from. But thus, I have, just a few. So Changez, of course, is very pacifying. He's attempting to make the guest at ease, like I explained before, by explaining the Pakistani culture, for example. So anytime the guest was frightened or unsettled when they were approached by, one of the people in the town or one of the waiters or something like that, he would put him at ease and say, no, he's here to serve us X, Y, and Z, or he's just asking if you want more tea. And the guest, again, the only details we get about the guest are from the responses from Changez, or even by him repeating what the guest may have said. So this entire book, again, it's it's only Changez talking. That's it. But the one thing we can tell is, again, that he is very clearly unsettled by the atmosphere and the culture of Lahore, Pakistan. And so if someone is that visibly shaken just by sitting in a market with someone who is obviously trying to be kind, why are they there? Theme time. Okay, so these themes, they're probably not going to surprise you. They're very explicitly discussed in this book. The first being fundamentalism. By definition, this is the strict adherence to any set of basic ideas or principles. Obviously, when we're talking about the reluctant fundamentalists, we're talking about Changez and how his values are shifting with the current events. And again, it might not mean that his values are changing or he's rediscovering some things that maybe he was raised with, and perhaps he forgot certain lessons or what have you. He's just kind of in the middle, and he's not the type of person to completely commit to a set of guidelines on either side. And so that's why he's reluctant. And that also plays into the notion that both of these characters are ambiguous. We can't really place them. But the one thing I will say about his character is that he does have a fierce need to protect his family, but to protect the name of his family, the country where he came from. Because sadly, if his country's name is being thrown in the dirt, then people are going to associate that with him regardless, especially if he's an American and he's a foreigner. Anything that they say about Pakistan, they're going to say about him. Now, Jim, who is the boss of Changez, but is someone who is painted as a mentor, he actually said out of his mouth that Pakistanis have got some serious issues with fundamentalism. So besides for the fact that that's racist, this is a direct hit to Changez because during this time, he's already kind of, having not doubts, but just questioning what it is he's doing in life. Is that contributing to his family besides money? Is he there for his family? What is he doing here? Now, besides that, fundamentalism is the basis of Underwood Samson's financial forecast. So that is the firm where Changez works. And it's a very prestigious firm. And they only award a certain amount of positions and people get cut after a certain amount of time. So this is the place to be. And the way that they got there is by sticking to their strict set of guidelines. What this really means is they work with blinders. So a lot of times this company, they're, I don't think they're or maybe they are like a valuation firm where they go to different companies and determine what you're worth. This really comes into play when we're talking about business acquisitions. When a bigger company is coming to buy you out, people are not really happy to see them. And a lot of the times they're going into countries that are not as developed as the US, or not as, they're not in big cities. And so the job requires for their analysts, for their associates to have these blinders on and just worry about the numbers. Does it have anything to do with the financial valuation of this business? If it does not, we don't care. Again, Changez eventually cannot do that anymore, even though he was very good at it. And the last theme is post 9/11 patriotism. So there was an intense need to protect the country, and there was outrage at anything perceived as a threat. So this was a time when people were scared. And so to combat that fear, everyone kind of came together as a country. And it wasn't that was the problem. The issue came in identifying everything that was not traditionally American as a threat. And that was common. So anytime someone saw something that maybe you're showing pride from a country you were born in or something like that, that would kind of give you the side eye. Because at this point, you're supposed to be, representing America. So really, a lot of people were left with asking, what does it mean to be an American citizen? From Changez himself, he says, I was, in 4.5 years when he was at college, never an American, but I was immediately a New Yorker. This is a nod to the fact that New York is the epicenter of the melting pot. There are so many different ethnicities, there's languages flying around, different tribes, everyone is in New York. And so it's difficult for you to feel out of place because I promise you, whatever country you've come from, they probably have, a situation somewhere in New York. They have a store where you can go and probably taste the food from your people, from your tribe. Everyone is represented in New York, essentially. Of course, I'm kind of generalizing here, but what he was essentially saying was that when the terrorist attack happened, it was the first time he was really reminded that, yeah, you're not an American and you're not really even a New Yorker at this point. Of course, this is part of the greater conversation of a foreigner versus a native. Both were expected to put forth a healthy dose of patriotism, but only the foreigner was subjected to suspicion regardless. You could walk around with an American flag, but if someone thinks you look like a terrorist, you're going to be harassed. And that was the really sad effect of 9/11 that I don't think a lot of people talk about. And I'm glad that this book touched on it because people died. Very unfortunate. But really, a lot of people were affected by those events. And that's part of the reason why this book is so important, because it shows a different angle of the destruction of 9/11. And lastly, just a few motifs before we get into the review. So there's this undercurrent of deceit. The guest, again, visibly does not trust Changez. And honestly, Changez kind of seems untrustworthy only because of the over-the-top kindness. So again, why are you being that kind? Is it so, to comfort this person, or is it to cover up something? Because I understand that if this was just a random man walking around to just kind of help him out because, this is your native country and, oh, do you need help ordering tea? I'll help you. But he's just he's really going out of the way to be super nice to this guy. And if someone was doing that to me, I would assume that I was about to be robbed or something. And I was half expecting for the guest to be put in a really bad situation. But, again, that's what the whole ambiguity. One of those words. Yeah. Another was the foreign ally. So Wainwright was one of the analysts that worked with Changez at the firm, but he was also another top achieving foreigner. And he played a significant part in Changez's character development because he kind of gave him pushback, but from the sympathetic approach that only another foreigner can have. So he provides support all throughout, and he cheers him on when he, succeeds and surpasses goals, but he also encouraged Changez to shave his beard. So post 9/11, again, this is a brown man that at that point had decided to grow a beard. It was drawing a lot of attention. And Wainwright was just looking out for his friend, and he said, listen, people are just getting the wrong impression of you, just shave the beard. And that was where Changez kind of pushed back and was like, I'm just going to do what I want. Because in reality, it's a beard. Like, why did we care so much? But it was putting off the perception, or it was really tapping into the paranoia of a lot of people. And lastly, the idea of good and bad. So it's clear who Changez faults in this situation. He has a lot to say about, American society versus how he was raised in Pakistan, and how, the humiliation that he endured just from being, a foreigner on American soil post 9/11 was completely unwarranted. But where does the audience find him? What side is he on? What side is the guest on? And what is this weird conversation that they're having? What is this? Honestly, it's implied that they both have their motives. But in the end, I think the point of this book was not to place either one on each side. It was to let you decide what happens. Now, the film, not the only place, I was able to find it on Amazon Prime Video, but I had to buy it. I think it's on YouTube for you to buy as well. I think they're both like $10. So if you're really interested in watching the movie, it's cool. The cast includes Riz Ahmed, Liev Schreiber, Kate Hudson, Kiefer Sutherland, and Puri. I think the major changes, the plot really adds, in the movie, it adds a lot of color to a picture that, in my opinion, was meant to remain unfinished. It was meant for the audience to, fill in the lines with their thoughts and their opinions. I would say, though, if you're going to read the book and watch the movie, do not watch the movie first, because it just gives you details that the book doesn't have. The book is very ambiguous, and you're not able to see past what Changez is telling you. So if you watch the movie first, you're going to go into the book with ideas of who you think these people are and what they did. So don't do that. Just read the book first. And the movie, I hated this. It really almost turned it into a rom-com, and it's not. The romance between Erica and Changez was a very small part of the narrative. And in the movie, I get it though, because that's kind of how film is. You kind of have to pull that aspect or cater to the audience and their emotions. But really, I mean, I think it took the innocence out of Erica and Changez's relationship, if we're being honest. In the book, it was very pure. The tone was certainly more intense in the movie. But again, as I've said in the past, that can be due to the fact that movies have musical scores and changing the pace, camera movement, all that good stuff. But it was definitely more tense. Whereas if you're relying on the monologue of Changez, everything is happy and, easy going and we're okay. As far as the characters, I hated Erica's depiction. I hated what they did with her character. I did not like it at all. I think they completely changed her character into someone who is fit for a rom-com. And Changez's arc is slightly flattened than in the book. And what I mean by that is, in the movie, it's not difficult to paint him as black or white, or paint him as an extremist, because they set it up kind of to look that way. And the same thing with the guest. But in the book, you're left, again, to your own devices to decide who these people are. In my opinion, the brilliance, if you haven't noticed, is nurtured from the ambiguity. On the surface, the character is telling his story, but there's so much more to it. And you really walk away feeling sorry for him. My one takeaway is, although this is fictionalized, which it took me reading like 75% of this book to realize that it was fictionalized, but it is. This story illuminates the ripple effect of terrorism. And that's that. So with that, I have just completed the last episode of 2021 and also season 3. So I will be taking a few weeks to cultivate some new book selections, and I'm going to tweak my production process a little, but fear not, I'll be back soon, sooner than you think. In the meantime, follow the podcast on Instagram, A.IdlePodcast. I definitely update that more than the Twitter, but you can follow the Twitter as well at A.IdlePodcast for updates. Soon I will be creating a TikTok. We'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, if you have any book suggestions or anything, feel free to email a.idlepodcast@gmail.com. It's in the YouTube description, so it's not hard to find. Also, rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts, as well as you can now rate it on anchor.com. I think if you go in through your desktop, it's anchor.fm. Either way, rate them, leave me a little review. Tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like, and we'll go from there. So thank you, and I will see you all in 2022.